In the world of crime, some names linger in infamy, casting long shadows over history. Richard Speck is one such name, forever etched in the annals of American criminal investigations. In 1966, Speck orchestrated a night of unthinkable horror that would shock a nation: the brutal murder of 8 nurses in a single Chicago apartment. But what drives a man to commit such atrocities, and how did Speck meticulously plan his night of terror? Richard Speck, born December 6 in 1941, grew up facing numerous adversities. His tumultuous upbringing, characterized by abuse and neglect, set a troubling foundation for his later life. Known for his erratic behavior and frequent altercations with the law, Speck's spiral into darkness seemed inevitable. His early criminal activities included petty theft and burglary, a prelude to the more sinister intentions festering in his mind. By the time he arrived in Chicago in 1966, Speck was an increasingly volatile character. In the weeks leading up to the infamous crime, he meticulously laid the groundwork for his plan. Speck secured a room at a boarding house not far from the South Chicago hospital where the student nurses resided. It is believed he initially intended to rob them, but his plans took a morbid turn. On the balmy evening of July 13th, armed with a knife and a gun, Speck broke into their townhouse. What transpired next was a calculated and chilling sequence of events. Speck methodically rounded up the terrified women, binding and gagging them. His actions were methodical, yet terrifyingly unpredictable, suggesting a mind consumed by malevolence. Calmly, he assaulted and murdered his victims one by one, while the others helplessly awaited their fate. Speck's actions were not those of a frenzied killer. They were deliberate, reflecting a terrifying mix of cunning and malice. Experts analyzing his behavior often point out the cold efficiency with which he carried out his plans. Unlike many other criminals, Speck seemed unmoved by hysteria or panic. This eerie composure suggests that, to Speck, this was not an act of passion. It was a grim mission, executed with precise cruelty. Remarkably, a 9th nurse, Corazon Amurao, managed to survive by squeezing under a bed while Speck's back was turned. Her courageous testimony became crucial in piecing together the harrowing events of that night. Speck was tracked down almost a week later, his capture bringing some semblance of justice to the victims' families. The notorious nature of Speck's crime and his subsequent trial prompted national outrage and debates about capital punishment and mental health. Despite his lack of remorse, or perhaps due to it, Speck's life ended in prison in 1991, leaving behind a legacy of fear and fascination that still perplexes psychologists and criminologists today. By examining the methodical way Speck carried out his crime, we're reminded of the complexities hidden within the human psyche, how fragile lines separate ordinary life from extraordinary horror. Speck didn't just commit murder. He orchestrated a tragedy that forces us to reflect on the profound darkness that can dwell in the mind of a killer. As we look back on Richard Speck, the question lingers: can such malevolence be mitigated, or is it an inevitable shadow cast by the darker corners of humanity?